Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I had actually asked my fourth grade instructor, Trisha Wynn, back in 2007 when I was in fourth grade, if I could write about it as an assignment. And she was religious as well, but she had to say no because we're not allowed to preach religion in schools. But I did ask her if I could share it at the time.
Yeah, and that's, I don't know, I don't have the answer to that. Like things have changed. But just something brought to mind. There was a video someone sent to me yesterday of an ex gang member in Melbourne, Australia. He's in his, I'd have to say close to 90s now, or late 80s, and he was sharing how he was in a gang, and they did some pretty full-on things back in the day, like full-on gang fights, chains, knives, bats. He said we even got to the point where we grabbed one of the other gang members' leaders and put his hand on the ground. We ran over his car. Sorry, this is a bit graphic, but they ran over his hand multiple times to break all the bones in his hand. And the reason I'm sharing the graphic of his violence is when Billy Graham was coming to Australia back in the day, him and 10 gang members had planned, they made zip guns, and they went to the event planned to kill Billy Graham. And they were in the audience, and because he said the reason he hated God was because his father was taken from him at such a young age. And he said, I just went out in the backyard and screamed. He said, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you for taking. And he said, so anything to do with anything like that faith, he hated it. And he said, when he heard Billy Graham was coming, they made these zip guns. They went to the event. He said, wait till he calls everybody out. And they went out to the center of the Oval. The MCG was packed, like it was just hundreds of thousands of people there, right? And he said, we got there and we're listening to the message. And he said, next thing, I'm crying. He said, and out of the 10 guys that went there, 9 gave their lives over to the faith. And he said, till this day, I think some of them have passed away, but they changed their whole lives. And I think he joined the Salvation Army after that. So that's an incredible video to watch, people's journeys of choices they make,
Yeah. And not only that, but after I left Estes Park in 2012, I went through my teenage years that I described in this book. And I made the mistake of stopping my practice of Christianity. Like I didn't.
I'd say you probably stopped you because, like Mark just said, you stopped your faith, mate. Like
Yeah.
And we all have a different opinion of it, but like Christianity or religion, sometimes, like Mark said, they can get tangled up in different ways and beliefs. I think it's just your faith, man. Like you kept your faith and you went back into your faith of what you believe.
Yeah, I made the mistake of leaving my faith.
Yeah.
And then what happened was I went through my rough spot, and it was around 2016 when I experienced a loss that you can read about in the book. And that's when I said, I need to go back to church. And when I went back to church, I spoke to a couple pastors, and they gave me some advice. And a few nights later, in October of 16, I had a spiritual rebirth, and it was sort of a sob story. And then afterwards, I had a relationship with God again.
And you're doing some amazing writing too, Doug, sharing your stories in, like ways in your book, Moses and the Great Escape. And maybe your next book, once you and me finish the science fiction book that we're still working on, you should write one about your faith. But let me just dive back. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great story about the bears. I'd never heard that before. I just want to dive back into Mark quickly before we run out of time. Your mention there also about the ups and, well, like Doug said, the ups and downs of life. Like Doug mentioned, I made a mistake, I did something wrong. I don't believe we do things. It's just life occurs. Things happen, and we don't want to label ourselves as being wrong and bad. I know their words are legitimate, but it's just life occurs. It's just being able to get out and get past that and keep moving. And Brian De Palma, his documentary is fantastic for artists to watch, because he said he had far more failures than he had, like he had amazing successes, but the failures he had when you started talking about your stories, it reminded me of him, and he just had so many failures in his early days, but he never gave up. He kept making short films, kept making them, making films, getting finance. Film didn't do so good, had a couple of bad years, but he never gave up, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's been my journey. Absolutely. I mean, I think that I'm still coming out of a period of great lesson learning, you know, and I'm looking forward to what's ahead. But yeah, I think my faith journey really, my experience of Christianity really began when I was 9 years old, because my mother was living in New York, and I was living in Sydney with my grandparents, and my mother had found, found Jesus in a church here in Sherman Oaks, actually in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
Yeah, and she came back and basically shared her experience with the entire family, and then literally one by one, all of our family members took the same journey, including myself, and we went to a church in Greenacre in Sydney, and we all became, uplifted by an experience with God, and encouraged by that, and there was a lot of healing that occurred in our family, because a family that came from apartheid, South Africa, was bound to be broken, and we were broken. But then something happened a couple of years later, when I was 12, where my aunt took her own life, and
that's sad.
She was suffering for a long time. She suffered from anorexia, and a lot of stuff had happened to her in her life that had pushed her to that point. And she was one of the most beloved people in my life. She was like a best friend. She was a surrogate mother. She was a sister. Just so many things to me, and we were very close. Like, she'd take me to the movies every weekend, and to Time Zone to play video games, and that loss kind of crippled almost everybody's faith in the family. I think, they definitely stopped going to church,
Yes.
And so my teenage years were very different to my late childhood, in that I had the belief in God. I constantly felt this presence that he was there, but I didn't have a community. And to be honest, we were a little bit disillusioned with church. Like, whenever we went to church, we felt that it was like more about an organization, more about asking for money, more about, and sometimes, as is with any community or any organization, there's a neglect that sets in when the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And so it wasn't until I was probably in my early 20s that I started going to church again. And even then, I never committed to it. I just could not ever relate to a church. So my walk with the faith has been one that has been very personal.
Yeah.
And it's been one that's been very centered in prayer and communion with God. But it's never been one that's been bound by a community. And through the years, I've had flirtations with going to a church for a while. I've been with you a few times, Andy.
Yeah.
Here. But I was very much in the wilderness, metaphorically speaking, until my early 30s, my late 30s. Probably till I was 36 years old. And, I'd read the Bible. I experienced like a lot of, I was living as a hypocrite, basically. I was saying that I believed in God, but I was drinking and occasionally doing, whatever. I was addicted to booze. I was, working as a bartender on the side. I was, womanizing a bit, and, doing all the things that I shouldn't have been doing, that just made me feel less whole as a human being.
Yeah.
I was in toxic relationships at times. I was, I've always been, my mother and grandmother raised me to be very respectful of women. So I never had a problem with, but I probably idolized women, in my life. I put them on a pedestal, and as a result, I kept chasing women, and it probably, you know, distracted me a lot in my life when at periods where I could have been a lot more productive.
And you know, nothing to
serial
do
relationship guy.
Yeah, well, nothing to do with it's like, it's nothing to do with the women that you're chasing per se.
No,
like
me.
they're doing their own life. It's your choice you do to
Absolutely.
keep chasing booze or drugs or
Yeah.
whatever you chase.
Yeah.
You know.
And look, the thing was that I loved self-destruction.
Yeah.
Because my aunt had taken her life and my best friend had taken his life, and I couldn't understand I couldn't wrap my head around what drives a person to that. So I wanted to get as close to that subconsciously as I possibly could to try and understand it. And you know, when I'd get drunk, I'd do silly things, you know, like walk across the road without looking or something like that, you know.
Yeah.
And I'd always be surrounded by lots of people because I'm a social animal, you know. So I knew people would take care of me, but eventually it got out of hand. And you know, it was probably affecting my professional life because I wasn't as focused as I should have been on the work I was doing, you know. And then you start to take things for granted. I mean, I took success for granted, and then I just started phoning in the work, you know. You know, and it's not like I was ever hugely successful, but I was, you know, successful in, relatively speaking, for a kid that came from, you know, Belmore in Sydney, you know, or and so I didn't come back to a sort of a commitment to my faith until I was 35 years old, where I just hit rock bottom. You know, I was working in Cambodia, and my drinking had gotten out of hand because I was working with, you know, a lot of overseas people and a lot of expats, and drinking is a way of life in those countries. I was working in Vietnam too. I was working Thailand, and just I was away from, you know, I was a new father, and I couldn't understand the responsibility that was required to be a father. And I think all that pressure, my wife and I were based in Bali at the time, and I just was internally crumbling under the pressure, you know, of having responsibility that, you know, I didn't understand. And so whenever I'd get these jobs overseas, I'd just kind of relish the freedom, and I'd, you know, be a booze hound, you know. I don't think I was ever like a daily alcoholic ever. But you know, I could go weeks and weeks without drinking anything. But when I did drink, I had no off switch, you know.
Yeah, right. It was just that comfort thing you could go for, and it's that gratification immediately. And you know, like I know people, even myself, I'll have a drink every now and again. But the thing is, it's you've got to keep control of anything like that, because especially in times like this now with COVID, it's so easy to look for something else to, you know, blot out the current situation, you know.
And, you know, my problem was that I thought I'd go long periods without drinking anything or without getting drunk, and then I'd go, oh, okay, I can handle this, I can have it. But the thing is that it was the first or second drink that would push me over the edge, you know. And so when I hit rock bottom, I just I had this moment of truth, and I don't know necessarily what separated that moment of truth from other moments of truth where I thought, you know, I got to give this up, and then tried, and then it failed. But this was different. This was where I thought I could actually either lose my life, or I could lose my family. And I had to wake up, you know, and to do that at 35. I mean, I've always been a late bloomer. I grew up a very shy kid, wasn't very social. And I think alcohol and cigarettes helped me to be more social. I needed to come face to face with myself, and I realized I just didn't like myself at all. And what changed everything was that my mother, being a very prayerful, and my mother's never been religious, but she's been extremely prayerful you know, and
Yeah.
extremely knowledgeable about the faith. You know, like she knows the Bible better than most pastors.
Huh.
You know what I mean? And she had just done this exercise where over 100 days she read the Bible
Wow.
out loud, and it sounds crazy, but what it did for her was it acted like a meditation. And not only did it help her understand the Bible better, but it helped her speak out the promises that are inherent in the Bible, the promises, the warnings, and all of those things, so that they actually, when you know the power of words, when you say things out loud, it almost changes your DNA. It's hard to explain, but it definitely reprograms your mind. And just learning who you are to God, you know, that you matter to Him, and that you matter in the broader scheme of things, that you have value and importance, and that God really is love. And then also understanding the history of the barbarism of the Bible in a contextualized way changed her scope. And then she encouraged me to do that. And I just started, and I didn't have the capacity to do it. You know, I find it hard to finish books at the best of times. But I did it over 100 days, and it was hard work, because it's a couple of hours a day, or an hour and a half a day. And most of the Bible doesn't make any sense, you know, the first time you read it. And there's a lot of he beget this and he beget that, and this number of tribesmen. You know, there's a lot of you know, chronological stuff in the Bible that was really boring. You know?
Yeah.
But when you read through the Psalms, or through the story of David, or through the Gospels especially, you start to really understand what is being spoken to you personally through that. And this is where, you know, I started to realize, okay, religion has hijacked the Bible, but what it really is it's a personal message that reflects different states of consciousness, you know, and in meditating through that, the experience of whispering it out loud, or speaking it out loud, I was able to understand what I feel is really being written about in those books. And it changed me. It changed my mindset. I realized that, you know, everything I was doing to destroy myself was because I didn't have an understanding of the love that had been invested in me, you know, at my birth, at my creation, you know, by my mother, but especially by a loving God. And it changed me. And I literally lost almost through that process. I literally lost almost overnight the desire to drink and the desire to smoke cigarettes. And from that, it took me probably just over 100 days, you know, because a few days I couldn't do it. But literally the day that I finished it, I got my visa approved to move to the United States.
Wow.
And it was shortly after my second child, Aaliyah, had been born. And everything changed, you know, for me from that point. And I couldn't afford to move my family to the US. But yeah, so when I first moved to the US, I was alone, you know. That's around the time I met you, Andy. And
Yes, yeah.
it's completely alone. So all I did was I put my head down and I worked, and I took general meetings, you know, it was off the back of the release of my film Terminus. So I took a lot of general meetings around Hollywood with different production companies, different producers.